So we're going to talk tonight about Social Security, the various programs that are available under that umbrella, and how to avoid some of the pitfalls there. I don't know if everybody here, I don't know how old the attendees are. I'm in my 40s. I'm a child of the 80s, and Atari games were like my very favorite thing. So if you recognize the picture on the slide, kudos to you. But there was an Atari game called Pitfall. And the whole idea was you swing across, the trees over various obstacles and tried not to fall in and die. So one of my favorite things ever. So knowing the programs that Social Security administers, the terminology that they use, and understanding that generally when you are responding to Social Security, you need to work quickly, are some of the best ways to avoid the pitfalls that people experience and some of the frustrations that we often hear people talk about when they are dealing with Social Security. So Social Security system is administered by the Social Security Administration. And that may seem really basic to start out with, but it's, I think some people don't really understand that large bureaucracy is the agency that is running all of these different programs. And they are also responsible for administering the application and denial process for Medicare. So although Medicare rules and regulations are handled by CMS, the actual application process for Medicare is run through the Social Security Administration. So they really have an awful lot of oversight for a huge percentage of the population between the disability community and the elderly. So the keeping that in mind as you go through that is also helpful, I think, because as you will see us talk about the various programs that they administer in this webinar, it's helpful to remember that some of these caseworkers might see a case that's kind of out of the ordinary every once in a while. I think for those of us who are kind of immersed in the disability community, we see these things happening on a regular basis and maybe forget that is not the case for everybody. So that's helpful to keep in mind. So the next thing I want to talk about is the sort of relationship between the Social Security employees and the people in the community. So there's I think a misconception out there that the Social Security employee's job is to act sort of like a social worker or even a customer service representative, where they are going to help you and kind of guide you through this process and explain to you what all of the programs are and what you're eligible for and things like that. And it's not really the case. Their job is simply to receive the applications and then make decisions about whether you are eligible for a specific program or not. There are some Social Security employees who are very helpful. So I don't mean that to say that they don't exist. Some are definitely helpful. They will walk you through processes and talk to you. Trust me, when I encounter one of those people, I keep their contact information forever and ever and go back to them all the time, because it is not super common that you'll get somebody who's willing to do that. And again, if we think about the volume of people that they are responsible for assisting on any given day, it does make a little more sense that they're not really going to spend a ton of time with any one person. So if you are starting your journey through the disability process, there's a couple of pointers just from the get-go before you have filed anything with Social Security that I would suggest you just take a minute and go through. So firstly, I would say review the list of conditions on their compassionate allowance list. So we've provided a link here. The reason to do that is because if you have been diagnosed with something that is on this list, there's an expedited approval process that you can go through to receive your Social Security benefit more quickly. So It's alphabetized. There are a lot of things that are on here. Some congenital, some adult onset, some childhood diseases. So they really run the gamut. But if your condition is on here and you have medical reports that will show that, then you're going to like fast track your application through. So for example, so let's say Parkinson's dementia, if we click on this, it will take us to the description of the illness, what they are looking for from the diagnostics so that if you had a medical report that said that you had these things, then you provided that to them. They're going to say, okay, you have this condition, you're going to be approved. So take a look through there before you even start, because you can use that list and that guide that each diagnosis has with it to tailor your disability report and make sure that you're kind of using the right language as you fill that out. The second thing I think is really spend some time on this adult disability report. This is the application that everybody who is applying for disability, whether it is Social Security, disability insurance, SSDI, or SSI, which we'll discuss later in the webinar, but everybody has to fill this out. This is many pages long, so 15 looks like between the instructions and the actual form. Some of the questions are really straightforward. They're going to be yes or no. It's going to be, short answer type questions. But then there are some that I think that require a little bit more explanation. And what I have seen some people do is they don't go into detail like they should in those different questions. And instead they kind of run through it. I think spend some time on it, come back to it and look it over again, or, maybe even 2 times, and make sure you've really put all the information that you have available to you. It's going to ask for a contact person. Make sure that is a person who really has a full understanding of the medical conditions. And another thing to keep in mind about this process is Social Security is looking for 2 things. So that disability report, of course, wants to know what your medical condition is that has caused the disability. But the next step for that is to say, does that disability prevent you from being able to work? So you really want to be able to focus on both those points. If you focus on the medical condition, but don't put in the work information, then you won't have a complete picture for the caseworker to look at. That tends to be where those applications kind of go off the rails a little bit, because people forget about that work piece. Be thorough about all of your medical conditions. There may be one primary condition that contributes overall to the disability, but you may have been diagnosed with several. Put them all on there. One by itself may not rise to the level of qualifying you for Social Security disability, but everything in total may. And you want them to take a look at the entire picture. Feel free to use supplemental sheets of paper. So I don't know about you guys, but I love an Excel spreadsheet. It's like one of my favorite things to do is create to-do list in Excel sheets. So if you have one and you can list, all of your doctor's appointments you've gone to, all of your medications and who the prescribing doctor is. For some people, I know they've got several different doctors they're seeing for different conditions. Put everybody on there. So be really thorough. Don't be afraid to add extra pages, even though it's already going to be a really long application. So as I mentioned a second ago, include all of your medical providers, right? Even if that's not the doctor that is treating you for your sort of main condition. And then there's a section at the very end of the disability report, section 11, that is just kind of a big text box for you to put things in. That's really a place where if you haven't had a chance to mention how your disability affects you or your ability to work before, that's a place to do it. Really paint a picture for the person who's going to be reviewing this report for what it is you can and can't do. more so what you can't do, right? We don't want them picking up on some little thing. Oh, well, I can sit in a chair for 2 hours, and have them say, well, you could work at a desk job for a couple of hours or something like that, right? So really paint a picture for them what sort of your daily life is like because of your disability. So if you have any medical records or doctor's reports in your possession, go ahead and send those in. They're going to request records from the doctors that you list on the report anyways. So they're going to get probably piles and piles of records depending on how long your condition has existed. But it doesn't matter if they're going to get duplicates. If you've already got it, go ahead and give it, just because you never know how long it's going to take for the records request to go through, whether they're going to send a complete record of everything that you have. So, or if you maybe forgot to list somebody and, but you happen to have, like a copy of your MRI or something that you had, go ahead and put all of that on there. There are interviews that are done. So once you've submitted your disability report, the caseworker has looked through it, you will be interviewed. Social Security does provide on their website a list of the questions that are going to be asked. I suggest that before you have your interview, go through there, look at the tips, look at the questions you're going to be expected to answer, and prepare responses, even in writing if you have to. Something that, especially if you're going to be sort of anxious about being interviewed in the first place, having it written down like on 3x5 cards or something may help you just sort of have something to look down at and remember what you wanted to say in response to that question. So you may hear us talk about, as we're going through this tonight, reference the POMS, which is the Program Operating Manual System. So this is the primary source of information that Social Security employees use when they're processing claims. But it's important to note that this is not actual law. It's technically policy. It can change and does change all the time. For example, when I'm working on a case for something, if I look up some section of the POMS and to either support or not, depending on what the situation is, I actually will print that section out, because the top right corner of that section will have the most recent date that it was changed. Because, I think, as most people are aware, this process is not fast. If you're not on that compassionate allowances list, it does take a while to get a decision on this. So between the time I first looked up this information and we actually get to the phase where we're communicating that to either a caseworker or an administrative law judge, depending on the situation, they could have changed that POM section. So I'm always wanting to document when it was. So it's not law, it changes all the time. But it is the place where caseworkers look to determine how they should rule on something. The way it's laid out, and we've provided a link for you here if you just, for fun, want to go look through it. The way it's laid out is really meant to walk a caseworker through what they should be doing for any given application, to include examples of, if somebody submits something and it looks like this, you can approve it. But if it looks like this, don't approve it, right? So that's the main thing caseworkers are looking at. That is what their training is based off of. Most of those sections are available to the public through that link that you'll see on the screen. Some are private and can only be accessed by Social Security employees. So technically, if you were to receive a denial to your application and they are basing that off of a specific section of the POMS, they should still tell you what that is and then provide a copy of it if you ask, but you won't necessarily be able to find it through this link. So we're going to kind of be referencing the POMS in and out because that is the primary way people are making decisions, not because it is the statute or the regulation that governs Social Security. And as hard as the POMS are to get through, they are easier to read than all of the statutes and the federal regulations. So I guess that's something. Okay, so I want to turn now and talk a little bit about the specific programs because as I mentioned before, there are lots of programs under the Social Security umbrella. And I think some get used interchangeably in a way that becomes confusing for people. So I want to make sure, again, knowing the terminology is one really great way to avoid the pitfalls, because we know which program we're talking about. We can then look up what the requirements are to be eligible. So one is supplemental security income, or SSI. This provides benefits, a monthly income benefit to person who have a qualified disability and the elderly. And I think that sometimes gets lost, is it actually both sets of people can qualify for it. Next program is Social Security disability income, so SSDI. I think these top two are the ones that are most often used interchangeably. Somebody say I'm on disability, and they're probably on SSDI, but they use it both ways. But SSDI provides income benefits to people with qualified disabilities who have a work record. So the amount, whereas SSI is going to pay a fixed amount every month, SSDI is going to pay varying amounts depending on your work record. So whatever you're earning, your earnings were over the course of your career or your time working is going to determine how much you're going to get paid every month. The disability insurance benefits or retirement insurance benefits are what people think of as the real Social Security benefits, right? This is an entitlement that once you hit a certain age, you're going to get, and it's not, you can be disabled and be on it, but you don't have to be. It's once you hit a certain age, you're just going to get it so long as you have that qualifying work record. There's also a program called Children Disability Benefits, or CDB. For a really long time, this was called Disabled Adult Children Program, or DAC. So you may hear people still use DAC instead of CDB. Same program, just different names. But this is a program that provides income benefits to the disabled child of an insured worker if the child's disabled before age 22. And we'll talk a lot more about this program later, because these benefits come with fewer rules and also usually a higher monthly benefit payment than do SSI. And if you have a child who was disabled very young, they likely in many situations don't have a work record, and so they're going to be eligible for SSI only, and that monthly benefit is not very much and has a lot of rules attached, as we'll talk about in a minute. So we've provided a couple of cheat sheets here for you. So we've put the top three programs on here. CDB is not included. It has a lot of rules that aren't easily broken down into this format, and also, even though we see it all the time, and I think the people who are watching this are probably, maybe more likely to take advantage of it, these three programs are really the most popular ones through Social Security. So it kind of just tells you the requirements for each one. And it also says, so what the income caps are, if there is one. So SSI for 2021 is going to pay a monthly benefit of $794 a month, which also ends up being the income cap, because as you'll see in a minute, if you were to earn $794 per month, actually a little bit more than that, but you'll see, then you would get no benefit. It would basically be a dollar for dollar reduction in your monthly benefit until it got down to zero. So something that I think people may not know about retirement Social Security is that there is actually an income cap there. If you're still working and receiving Social Security retirement benefits and you make more than right now $18,960 per year, that can affect your retirement benefits as well. And then remember what I said about SSDI being based on your work record, right? And the point of this program is that you are disabled but also cannot work. So on SSDI, while you don't have all the same rules that SSI has, there is a limit for how much you could earn and still receive SSDI. And that's right now, $13.10 per month. And basically say if you earn more than that per month, you're not incapable of working. So you're not eligible for that program anymore. So you can come back to that at your leisure and kind of look through it. One other thing I'll point out is on here, we've said state supplements. You can see kind of, what is that, fourth row from the bottom. There are some states, Missouri does not do it, but there are some states who actually pay more in addition to that fixed monthly SSI amount to control for the cost of living in that area. So Missouri does not, it's just going to be $7.94. But if you are in another state or thinking about moving to another state, just keep that in mind that you may be able to get an increased benefit. This chart, another little cheat sheet. We've compared Medicaid and Medicare. Now, Medicaid is not run by the Social Security Administration, but because these are the two health insurance programs, we've put them on the same slide. I'll make a note about the part that says administered by, and under Medicaid, it says states. It is administered by the states. It's actually a joint federal and state program, though. For ease of simplification, we've put states here because each state is going to administer their Medicaid program just a little differently. So there's going to be slight differences. In Missouri in particular, we are a state that does not automatically give you Medicaid eligibility just because you're on SSI. Many states do, but we don't. You'd have to file a separate application for Medicaid, even if you're getting SSI. And so, there's lots of other little differences. The other thing to note is that Medicaid is this really big umbrella with lots of programs underneath it. So you can see where it says it covers in-home care, skilled nursing care, prescriptions, some community-based programs. Most of the independent living or supported living arrangement waiver programs are under that Medicaid umbrella, whether through Department of Social Services or Department of Mental Health in Missouri. That's a whole nother presentation on its own, but just know there are a ton of things that fall under that Medicaid umbrella. So being eligible for Medicaid can become a really important thing. There, you do have to meet, though, financial and disability requirements. I'm sure we've all heard in the news, though, that applications are open for the Medicaid expansion in Missouri. So you can apply now either online or at a Department of Social Services office. They prefer online. So everybody who maybe didn't qualify before could go on now and reapply under that program. So let's talk about some specifics under SSI. SSI is the most restrictive disability program that there is. It has the most rules that go along with it. It is the program where people run into the most trouble and have the most confusion about what you can and can't do under that program. So, but is also the program that many people are eligible for, because if you don't have a qualifying work record, this is what you can get. You can't get SSDI, so instead you get SSI. There are income and resource limits to be eligible in addition to being disabled. So, you're going to still meet those same things on that disability report. Are you disabled and does it prevent you from working? In addition to that, they're going to do a financial review to make sure you meet the income and resource limits. Not all income is excluded. So as I mentioned before, $794 is the current monthly amount for SSI. They do exclude the first $20 per month of income. And I want to take a minute to just clarify that what they consider income is not necessarily just wages. And so this is an area, I think, where a lot of mistakes are made because people think, well, I'm not working, so I don't have any income. Maybe this some, grandma paid for my utilities this month because I couldn't make it work, or somebody paid for my groceries or whatever. That is still considered income under Social Security's definition. So they will exclude the first $20 per month. If you are working, they will take off the first $65 of that, and then half of anything that you earn on top of the $65. Anything beyond that, though, is going to result in a dollar for dollar deduction in your monthly benefit. So if after you calculate that, you're still earning, let's say $300 per month, they're going to reduce that $794 by $300 per month. So it's important to keep track of all of that. They do not count food stamps as income. So if you are receiving Medicaid, SSI, and food stamps, that's not going to reduce your monthly benefit. They also don't count as income shelter that is provided by a nonprofit organization. And I guess I should take a minute here. I didn't mention before, but the public policy purpose of SSI benefits is to provide food and shelter for low-income disabled people. So what they are mostly concerned with is your food and shelter being provided by some other source such that Social Security doesn't need to pay you this benefit every month. So that's why that definition of income is a little more broad than what we would traditionally consider. So shelter provided by a nonprofit organization is not considered income. There's a story that we like to share in the office about a Social Security caseworker who is pretty high up in the organization, had been working for them for a really long time. And I think, sometimes you're in those positions, you get blinders on a little bit, but she was basically reducing people's benefits because they were staying in homeless shelters or getting meals from a food bank. And so she said, well, somebody else is providing food and shelter, so we're going to reduce their benefit. That went up to the person who oversees the way this program works at the main office there outside of Baltimore. And they're like, that's not what we mean. So if it's provided by a nonprofit organization, they're not going to reduce your benefit. They also don't reduce it for most home energy assistance programs. So if you're receiving help paying for utilities through one of those programs, they're not going to reduce your monthly benefit. They also don't count income from shelter workshops, which is helpful for those who want to still have some ability to work for all of the reasons why work is good for people, but not reduce their monthly benefit. They will never pay SSI to felons, parole, and probation violators. So, that even if someone who is in that group later becomes disabled, they're not eligible for SSI ever. You do also have to be a U.S. citizen. On the cheat sheet that we just saw a few slides ago, you saw that that's not the case for the other two Social Security programs on there, but for SSI, you do have to be a U.S. citizen. I started out working during law school and after for legal aid. And one of the things that we had a hard time with was there were disabled children, significantly disabled, who were eligible for SSI, but their parents were undocumented. And they then could not accept the payment on behalf of the child. So we had to find some other source to receive the payment so that the child could receive that benefit. So it's important to remember that you do have to be a U.S. citizen. There are also some rules. We have encountered some instances in divorce situations where one parent is paying either alimony or what's also called maintenance to their spouse and child support. And we'll talk in a second about a process called deeming, where if you have a minor child who is otherwise eligible for SSI, but the parent's income is deemed to that child to make them ineligible, there is a way now through the use of a special needs trust to reduce the impact of those payments so that the minor child could still receive the monthly benefit. In addition to that, if you have an adult child who's still living at home, so there are sometimes instances in a divorce order where child support is ordered beyond the age of majority because the child is disabled and expected to remain disabled. So the parents, the court will say that the parent paying child support has to do that for longer than 18. That can also go into a special needs trust so that the adult child can receive their SSI benefit. So maybe even the numbers don't work when they're a minor, but once they turn 18, we can at least have that child support not count as income to them. So cash received by an SSI recipient from a social service agency does not reduce your check every month. Some social agencies are excluded. So schools is one of those. Vocational rehabilitation programs or voc rehab. If you're receiving like a monthly stipend or something from those programs. Government income maintenance programs, TANF in Missouri, which is that monthly benefit paid to low income Missourians. And then food, shelter, laundry, and recreation is not automatically social services. So for example, if a parent is paying rent for a child, it's not automatically going to be counted, but I do want to sort of stress the point that if your child is an adult and they are living at home and they're not paying anything to do that, but you also want them to be eligible for SSI, there are some special rules under this program called in-kind support and maintenance, or ISM. Some caseworkers will call it ISM, that will reduce monthly benefits if somebody else is providing those things and the disability, the SSI recipient is not paying for them. So my recommendation in our office is always to have some sort of a room and board agreement in place with the child who's living at home. So I talked a little bit before about those parental deeming rules, where if you have a minor child, your household income is going to impact their ability to receive SSI. There's a really sort of complex and convoluted calculation for how they determine whether you would meet the rules for that or not. But there is a waiver available to people so that they can get that. So if a disabled minor child is eligible for SSI, and the only reason they're not eligible is because of their parents' income and resources, they can receive one of these Beckett waivers, which basically takes away those deeming rules and said they're eligible anyways. But there are 3 requirements that you have to meet in order to meet this waiver, and they're very specific. And so you want to be very careful to document all of these things in order to qualify for the program. So the first is that you have to have been in an institutional setting for more than 30 days, which does include the hospital. So very extended hospital stays will meet this requirement. And that care in the institutional setting or the hospital, whichever it was, needs to have been paid by Medicaid. So if private insurance or some other form of payment covered that stay, then it doesn't work. The other thing that has to happen, and I think this one is probably the one that is most often missed, is that when you're in an institutional setting and Medicaid is paying for that care, your Social Security per month will get reduced to $30. But if you don't have that reduction happen, if you were to continue receiving your full monthly benefit while you're institutionalized, then you don't meet the requirements for this waiver. Sometimes it requires you to simply contact Social Security, let them know that this is what's going on so they can reduce your payment. I've had a couple of cases I can think of in the last couple of years where they met the first 2 things, but their payment wasn't reduced. And so Social Security did not grant that waiver. So, and again, I want to tie this deeming, the parental deeming thing, back to the child support issue I was talking about earlier real quick. So having that child support go into a special needs trust will it solves this deeming issue, because if you have a minor child and their child support payment is ordered by the court to go into the special needs trust, it's not considered household income, right? So it's not parental income. It's not going to be deemed to people. So you can use that for both situations. So I'm going to turn it over now to Martha. She's going to talk about a couple of the other programs and the childhood disability program.
So I'm going to continue the program, and I'm going to start out by talking about the CDB benefits, because these are very important for families who have a family member who was disabled before age 22. It's full of pitfalls, and it's something I really want to highlight because I've had to counsel people who unfortunately fell in one of the pitfalls. So CDB program is the program where the child is able to get basically a disability benefit out of the parent's account. So their check is going to be based on what the parent paid in. And for a lot of people, that's a lot more money than the SSI payment. But the biggest pitfall is the child cannot work. And this is really difficult because I've raised children, and I believe work is very important. So we want our family member to be part of society and be a productive member of society. But if they work, they lose the CDB program. So what I always recommend people do is do an internship. Ask if you find a job that you think would be great for your child, but you really don't know if they're going to be able to do it. Rather than lose the CDB benefit, why don't you let them be an intern for a while? I worked with one family whose daughter loved babies, really loved babies, and they were trying to help her find a job where she could be around babies. They knew she couldn't take care of babies because of her situation, but they knew she'd want to be around babies. So they went to the St. Louis Crisis Nursery, and they said, can she be an intern for a while, and can we see if she can do something? And so she worked there, and eventually she was hired. And then after a number of years, she was no longer able to work, but she had paid into the system. So she got disability benefits based on what she had paid into the system. But first they didn't know if she could do it. So they went through this internship process, which is a good way of finding out if it's a job that the family member can do. So I'm a big believer in that, because one day of work, you lose the CDB. So it also, with the CDB, it can be received on the account of a step parent or a grandparent. That child has to have been living with the recipient when they're establishing eligibility. So if they're living with their step parent or they're living with their grandparent, and they're disabled, and before age 22, they didn't work, they then can get it on the step parent or the grandparent, as long as they're living with that person when they go to apply. So, some people will say, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply based on my child's grandparent. He's a surgeon. I think this will be great. I'll get a very nice check. Well, he's got to be living with the grandparent. And also, the step parent or the grandparent have to give, regular and basically more than half of the support costs of that child. If it is grandparents, though, the parents have to be both disabled, or one disabled and one dead, or both dead. So if you are in that situation and you're trying to figure it out, if you are claiming the child as a dependent on the tax return, then you're basically saying you're supplying at least half the support of that child. And the child with a disability receives 50% of the benefit at retirement. And when the parent dies, it gets 75% of that benefit. So as you can see, it's a significant, usually a significant additional amount of money than it is when you're receiving SSI. So that's why you don't want to give this up if you can, because it really is a big help to families. Also, the CDB recipient is eligible to receive Medicare after 24 months. There's a very common misnomer that Medicare only pays, you can only get Medicare after age 65. people who are disabled after they've received the disability benefit for 2 years, which includes the CDB program, they then are eligible to get Medicare. And this has been a tremendous help to families, especially in areas where Medicaid is not readily accepted. Fortunately, here in St. Louis, we have 2 medical schools and they accept Medicaid. But if you go to, for example, Springfield, Missouri, you're really limited in the doctors you can see because they don't take Medicaid, but they may take Medicare. And so what the Social Security Administration does is they use what they call the constructive application analysis to determine when the child gets the CDB program. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is that if mom or dad go to apply for disability, they're supposed to ask you if you have a child who's disabled. When they retire, they're supposed to ask that, and they're supposed to ask that when someone dies. So if they say yes, then Social Security automatically, if the system works correctly, is supposed to complete an application and convert that child from SSI to CDB. So if you have a parent who retires or dies, you need to give Social Security notice right away, and they will then convert the SSI to do that. If you give them notice and they don't do it, then the benefits will go back to the date of the parent's disability or their retirement application. And I did have this about 7 or 8 years ago. A family came to me and they had never applied for any kind of Social Security disability for their daughter. And she never was able to work. She only worked in shelter workshops. When we say work in the Social Security setting, we're talking about people working for what they call competitive wages. You're out on the workforce. If you're working in a shelter workshop, or you're working in a job supported environment, those are not competitive wages. So we're only talking about work involving the people when we are out in the open marketplace for work. So anyway, what I was saying before is in that one case, dad retired and he never, he did tell them he had a disabled child because it was in the application. And when he went back to apply for the CDB benefit, they received $100,000. So it can be significant. It can be significant. All right. So as I said, it can be significant if the mistake is discovered many years later. If you do not give them notice and they later learn it, they will only go back 6 months for retirement. And then 12 months if it's a disabled parent. So see, here's a pitfall where you don't tell them. So if as a parent or a grandparent or a step parent, if you are applying for your retirement or death or disability, remember to say that you have a child who has that situation. And you then they'll convert them immediately to CDB. Overpayments. So I want to go over overpayments because it's very unclear to people. You can ask Social Security to waive the overpayment. So the overpayment, if you get a notice of an overpayment, you will see in there that you can waive it, but you only have a very short period of time. I think it's 10 days right now. It's kind of moved around over the years, but it's a very short period of time. So the minute you get a notice of an overpayment and you want Social Security to waive it, then what you have to do is you have to immediately file a request for a waiver. And it's a form. If you go into the Social Security website, waiver of overpayment, you plug it in, it'll come up. And what you have to do, and you have to do it within the time period, the waiver will be granted if it was not the fault of the recipient. And this is very common that it's not the fault of the recipient. What happens is somebody, they periodically will review files in Social Security in the disability program, whether it be SSI, SSDI, or something else. They will, and then they'll make a recalculation and say, oh my goodness, we overpaid you. Well, as a layperson, trying to figure out how they determine what they pay you it's nigh impossible. So there's no way that could be your fault unless you hide something. You're working and you don't tell them and they get a copy of the W-2. then you're at fault. So you also have to show that the recipient is unable to repay the overpayment. And what you have to show basically is show your monthly budget and show what is owed and what you pay. And then they're going to say in there, what happens when you're short? Because it looks like you must be short every month. Well, what you say basically is you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. 1 month you pay the utilities, the next month you don't. The next month you do, the next month you don't. That's how you juggle the fact that you have less income than expenses. Now, if the waiver is denied, repayment of the is usually at 10% of whatever the Social Security check is. So it's a very small amount. But when you're only getting SSI and you're getting $794 a month, and that's what you're living on, if they take $79 away, that's significant. That's pretty significant. So really don't forget that you can ask for a waiver, but you've got to do it very quickly. So when you get these notices, you sit down and you read them through and you figure out what you're going to do. Most government benefits, you have to respond immediately. All of us in regular old life are considered that don't have to use government benefits. We always think that we've got 30 days. I don't know why, but in my mind, I always think, I've got 30 days to deal with this. Well, you don't with government benefits. You sometimes have less than 20. Often you have only 10. So it's important to look at the notice the minute you get it, read it, and act on it. So if you don't understand the overpayment, it doesn't make any sense to you, you did everything you were supposed to, ask for a reconsideration. Again, you're under a time deadline, so do it immediately. It is not unusual to have the overpayment reviewed and changed. I sometimes tell my clients as a joke, when they're trying to figure out the overpayment, I think they just put numbers on a dartboard and start shooting and see what happens. So if you feel that it's wrong, do ask for reconsideration. But you show clearly that it's not the beneficiary's fault. This may be a recalculation that's been done by the Social Security Administration. How could that be your fault? Because you don't understand how to calculate it in the first place. I know I don't. So it's really important to ask for the reconsideration right away, and they are often changed. All right, so substantial gainful activity rules. So if you're disabled, you're considered to be unable to engage in substantial gainful employment. And so the Social Security Administration has basically made a rule that you have to report all of your earnings, okay? If your earnings go above a certain limit, then you're considered to be able to work. You're engaging in substantial gainful employment. And that figure for 2021, they have not announced 2022 yet, is $13.10 a month if you're not blind. Now, for whatever reason, Social Security has special rules for people who are blind. So if you are blind, it's $21.90 a month. And so if you work, so for example, the other day I was talking to a family, their daughter gets she gets CDB, and she grooms dogs. All right. And so she makes about $500 a month. So she's not working enough for it to affect her ability to lose her disability. So she can work for $500 a month and still keep her disability because it's under $13.10. And that figure is the same if it's SSI, SSDI, or CDB. All three, it's the same figure. Because remember, with SSI, let's say you're making $1,300 a month. What they're going to do is give you the first $65. They're going to take what remains, they're going to divide it in half. And if you're making more than that, that'll be deducted. Well, if you divide in half $1,300 a month, I ran this today, make sure I was right, because I've done this before, but my memory is not what it once was. You still have about $80 a month from SSI. The limit is the limit, and it's absolute. So I always tell people, don't play with it. What trips people up with the substantial gainful employment limits are things such as bonuses at Christmas. That's a big problem. Administrative assistant day bonus. That's another one. I worked with a family where the brother was doing fine. He was keeping it under $13.10 a little bit, but he kept getting a Christmas bonus, and then they would divide the Christmas bonus by 12, and that would take him over the edge because he was working at about $13.05 a month. So he didn't have any wiggle room. So I always suggest to people, give yourself some wiggle room so you don't ever lose the benefit, because you have to start the whole process over again. If you and when you're looking at substantial gainful employment, there's two things to look at. One is if you're self-employed, you look at the cost of doing business, and that will be deducted from the monthly figure. So if you have costs for doing business and you are, let's say, at $1,400, but your cost to do business are $400 a month, then you would be under the substantial gainful employment figure. Okay. That's also true if there are costs for employing the individual. So if there is a need for a job coach, if there is a need for transportation, all of those expenses, if those are incurred, those are deducted from the substantial gainful employment figure. And so many people say to me, well, how would I show what the job coach is? So for example, I've worked with several families where they had a family member who worked at Schnucks. Schnucks has, over the years, developed a program where they give you those figures. And so if you ever have that situation and they're working for a larger employer, another one that keeps all of that, who works very hard to employ people with disabilities, is Walgreens. And so they will give you those figures, and you can then submit them to Social Security. Because when you think about it, you're like, well, how can I show what Schnucks is paying someone to help my son continue to work there? I mean, I don't have that information, and why would Schnucks give it to me? Well, they understand the situation, and they will give you those figures. They've calculated it. And they have a letter that looks extremely efficient with some accountant in the office has explained what that is. Now, this figure of substantial gainful employment is raised each January. So you can make more each January. But again, remember, because of the variables, when the employer may be giving you some money, an extra like a bonus, keep it below that figure. Don't huddle around that figure. Keep it down enough that you don't have that problem where all of a sudden you've got a significant problem. So then there is the program. This is another pitfall that I wanted to bring up. And it's a pretty complicated program, but you need to be aware of it. It's called the Ticket to Work program. And if you're getting SSDI or CDB and you want to try working, Social Security has this program where you will continue to receive benefits during the first 9 months that you are working. And so what happens is you're working and you're getting SSDI or CDB. Social Security wants to encourage you to work. So they will allow you to do what they call the trial work period, but they call it the Ticket to Work. And Medicaid has a similar program also. And this Ticket to Work program can be a little tricky. So just because you do this work doesn't mean your disability has stopped. So don't assume that if you are working and you're making some money that it's not gonna work against you. There's only one trial work period for each period of disability. So if somebody, let's say, decides they want to do that, they're going to start trying to work, and they start accruing months of work, and then they can't do it anymore. Then that one trial work period, you've been declared disabled, you don't get another one. You only get it once. Now, if you're someone who has, and the only example I can think of as I'm talking right now is people with MS. Sometimes they'll have periods where they can't work, and then the MS will go into remission, and then they can work for a while, then they have to go back on disability. So that would be an example where they would get a different trial work period under certain rules each time they're disabled. And so it's important to know that if you're working really hard with your family member to try and get them to be working, that this program does exist. Certain people are not eligible. After age 55, you're not eligible for this program. People ask me why. I have no idea. If you're enrolled in a voc rehab program and your disability is stopped, but you're continuing to get benefits, you're not eligible to get this program. And that is a very unusual program that happens very, very rarely. So I wouldn't hone in on that. The Social Security retirement, I just wanted to give you these figures because I think it's really important to understand the figures, and because you'll have family members that are going to apply for retirement and the CDB benefit is going to kick in. So I think it's important to kind of know what they are. So if you're born before 1937 or earlier, it's age 65. If you 38 to 42, you add 2 months per year until you get to 1943 to 1954, it's age 66 is full retirement. 1955 to 1959, you add 2 months per year to 66, and then 1960 and after are age 67. So you get a reduced amount of retirement if you retire and start taking your Social Security before that date. And that will reduce the CDB benefit that your child will receive. So it's important to understand, when you're trying to decide what to do, what you want. So I think that's important to figure out what works. And when you go to Social Security and you look on your account, you'll see they'll lay it all out for you as to what is involved in terms of what you'll receive, what a disabled child would receive, what the family limit is, and your spouse, and what would happen at death, and what would happen at retirement, what happens at disability. So all that is laid out. So it's important to get that account statement to understand and make decisions about what your child should do or what your family member should do. The Pickle Amendment. So I wanted to explain the Pickle Amendment because I think a lot of people don't understand it, and they are wrongfully thinking that with the Pickle Amendment, you are in a situation where if your child gets the CDB benefit, they're going to lose their Medicaid because they have too much income now. So if dad, right now at age 70, the maximum amount of Social Security you can receive as a retired person is $4,000 a month. So if your child's getting 50%, that would be $2,000 a month. Well, under Missouri rules, your income has to be much lower than that to be on what we call straight Medicaid or Medicaid, where you never have to pay anything. But if they are getting $2,000 a month, then they would traditionally have to pay more. Well, the Pickle Amendment was Congress's answer to handling this problem. And this is really important, especially if your child is participating or your loved one is participating in a program that's basically a waiver program, which means you have to be Medicaid eligible. So, and a lot of the community-based programs in Missouri for people with developmental disability are based on Medicaid. Medicaid are the rules. So it's important to make sure you do the Pickle Amendment and you understand it. So the Pickle Amendment was a way of dealing with this issue. So if you are SSI and you're on Medicaid, and then you're going to basically convert to CDB, and your amount of your income is going to be much higher, there's a calculation that Medicaid does to determine how much you're going to have to pay for your Medicaid. And under many circumstances, you're going to pay nothing. Now, if you were a wage earner that has a high Social Security monthly benefit, then you are going to pay more. Okay. And so that's why the Pickle Amendment is really important. And a lot of people come to me and their child has lost Medicaid once they went on CDB, and they're pretty upset and they can't figure out what's going on. Well, normally what happens is somebody did not use the Pickle Amendment. Or the person is such a high earner that the calculation is going to be much less, and they are going to have to pay more. The important thing to understand about the Pickle Amendment, to make sure that your family member is eligible to participate in it and to participate in the calculation, is you have to be on SSI for at least 2 months before you go to the SSDI or the CDB. If you are not, you will not get it. So I have family members who decide that they have medical insurance, So they're not going to ever worry about Medicaid, and they're not going to worry about SSI. They've heard about all the hassles with it, and they can afford things. And so they're just going to go ahead and they're going to apply for the CDB program when they retire. And then voila, they'll just apply for Medicaid at that time. But they don't get the Pickle Amendment. So they end up with a huge Medicaid copay each month. So the Pickle Amendment is really important to understand. And in Social Security, they have a calculation, which most states have adopted, of how the Pickle Amendment should, how the pickle formula should be handled. Now, I recently worked with a family where the father's still working. He's 74. The dad started getting Social Security at 70. And the daughter had been on SSI. And so they then went to apply for the CDB, and they were denied, and they were told because the daughter wasn't on SSDI that they couldn't get the Pickle Amendment. So they came to me and we did the calculation. They do get some reduction, but it's not significant because the father's Social Security check is so high. His check is the highest it can be. But I have in the past done it where the people end up paying nothing for Medicaid. So it's really, it's something you need to look at and you need to be aware of as something that's really, really important. And so in the end of our calculations, we did include, at the end of our program, our presentation materials, there is the how you calculate the Pickle Amendment. So if any of you all ever need that, you know it's there. And it's something that people don't talk a lot about, but it can really help a family. And so it's really important, I think, that everybody know that it does exist and that it's something to look out for. So
we do have a couple of questions.
great.
So the first one is, what should I do, or what should you do if your child was denied SSI but has a documented intellectual disability and has had support from a young age due to her disability and supported by a waiver for in-home support and has participated in volunteer to work programs but cannot work without support? So all that was going on, but she was denied SSI.
Yeah. Well, there's two things you could do. You could appeal, or you could go and reapply. But I would include all the documents that you've ever had. If you have an IEP, usually there's a lot of diagnostic information in there. And I would also include a lot of work records. I would try to be extremely thorough. And I would just, if the appeal period is ended, I just start over.
The second question is, I have a family, single mother with 2 children, one with autism, but mom works. Mom reports her monthly income, but recently received a letter in the mail stating that she was overpaid SSI, even though she's reported her monthly income. How is this possible?
Now, this gets back to the overpayment, how you need to file a request for reconsideration. Because it often recalculated, they discover they made a mistake. So, that's very common. So that's really important, I think, to go ahead and ask for reconsideration. I don't know the time period, but that's really an important thing to do there. I don't know what was going on.
Yeah, that's what I've seen happen on that is she was reporting all of her income, but Social Security wasn't necessarily doing anything with it, right? It like went into some black hole. And then every couple of years, they kind of match their system to the IRS. And so they'll get income reports and then they do the calculation. And that's why people get those overpayments. So like Martha said, if you can do the reconsideration, which would have them either do away with it or maybe even reduce it, I would do that. If they come back afterwards and still say that there's an overpayment due, then you can ask for the waiver, especially if she was reporting her income that entire time.
Here's another question. We have 2 adult children who both get SSI. Both my spouse and I work and will draw our own Social Security each. How will the 2 kids' CBD amount be figured out?
Well, that's going to be a complicated one because they have family limits per account. So normally what happens in that situation is the the worker is supposed to help the family figure out which child should go on what account so that they can maximize the amount of money they receive. But what's going to happen is they're going to have to, based on, it gets a little complicated in that situation because parents, if the parents don't apply at the same time, if they have, some difference in age, then, it's going to be a decision, who to put where and what to do. That's going to be a complicated one that's going to take a lot of thought to figure out.
Well, I want to thank both Martha and Nikki for being here, for sharing their expertise, for answering questions, for helping us with a difficult topic. So we are so appreciative of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're happy to help. We're happy to be here.
Thank you.